Now move into our first mega trend of financial wellness, sponsored by Old Mutual, and invite John Manyike, the head of financial education at Old Mutual, with an opening address into this mega trend, employing a magnifying glass onto how we can create a pandemic-proof work design that definitely contributes to employee wellness. What we also are going to do now is hand over this opening address to John on how to create a pandemic-proof work design that definitely contributes to the employee wellness, covering some of the points that, of course, have been hinted at by our previous speakers. Please welcome to the virtual stage John Manyike, the Head of Financial Inclusion and Education at Old Mutual Limited.
Thank you very much for having me. I would like to just hop in as well on that subject. And I quite liked what the previous speaker said, particularly the point she made about people over profit. And that's what we're going to be talking about, as we present our On the Money program, especially in a challenging time such as this. So in order to do that, we're going to be able to highlight what are some of the impacts of financial constraints in the workplace. And I'm going to start off with a very, very short clip of an interview we did on Power FM a couple of months ago on this very subject.
This is the Express Edition. Fridays. This is the Express Edition. Fridays, 6 to 7 p.m.
6:29, we move swiftly to a very fascinating conversation, and one that I think is going to be quite important and top of the agenda for many businesses. And here we are talking about employee well-being affecting the bottom line of any business. Head of Financial Education at Old Mutual, John Manyike, joins us for this conversation. Manyike, good evening.
Good evening to you.
A pleasure to be speaking to you, and this is quite an important conversation in a time of a global pandemic. How critical has, focusing on the well-being of employees become?
It's very, very critical, especially given the fact that, as South Africa is trying to get back to business, to normalize things. Unfortunately, the reality is we have a lot of employees who are still grappling with the realities of salary reductions, increasing levels of debt, and generally the cost of living, with a lot of job losses that we've seen. Now, the problem here is, for employers to see at least some difference in the bottom line, they have to understand that employee well-being is very important, because you cannot separate an employee from their personal life and some of the financial stresses that they have. And unfortunately, when that plays out in the workplace, it tends to affect productivity levels. It affects the employee's ability to meet the employer standards. And then you end up having situations where, the employer is affected as people leave employment to find alternative employment in order to pay off their debt.
This is the Express.
So that was a very short clip on that specific subject. It was a bit longer, but we just shortened it for the benefit of this session. So we want to highlight a couple of things that we see as impacts of financial constraints in the workplace. Well, for a lot of employers, you might see this as labor issues or industrial relations issues, but from a financial well-being point of view, we see these as some of the constraints. Some of the common examples are absenteeism. We know from Stats SA that South African employers lose about 16 billion rand to absenteeism. And of course, there's another phenomenon called presenteeism, where employees do turn up for work, but actually are not productive. We see trends around sick leave abuse, and then also employees resigning in order to access their pension to pay off their debts. Fraud and theft also tends to become an issue as employees trying to make ends meet, and they end up being creative. Workplace accidents also happen because when an employee is preoccupied about their financial difficulties and they are not focused and are disturbed, and they can easily cause an accident. This could be an accident in a manufacturing setup. It could also be paying money to a wrong client, and employers would either call that gross negligence or any other similar charge. But in which case, if you understand the root cause, you know that this could be finding expression in their financial difficulties. Productivity levels, certainly a given, when employees are not focused. Health problems, which ultimately affects, the sick leave trends or absence management, depression and anxiety, substance abuse, as well as lack of concentration at work. And then, of course, the most common one, where employees are simply demanding higher wage increase above inflation, very often done through their trade unions. But again, as you can see, that these are quite common, especially in the workplace. Other impacts on the organization includes employees end up bringing in a lot of their personal issues at work, and this is why employers have employee assistance program where they provide counseling to their employees, discipline issues, team relations issues. As you would imagine, some employees can borrow money from each other, and then it can also start affecting team relations and interpersonal skills. Recruitment costs tend to go higher as employees resign to try and find a better income. Litigation could also happen when employees compromise the values of the employer with their customers and stakeholders. Training costs as you continue to hire new staff. As of course, the reputation of the organization can also be at risk. So those are some of the things. So we've done a research which we do on an annual basis called Old Mutual Savings and Investment Monitor. And what the results are telling us is that 87% of people that we survey, particularly those living in metropolitan areas, claim that COVID has changed the way they think about money and the way they manage money. And then we also saw about 38% reporting that they are earning less than what they were earning before COVID. I mean, these are real financial difficulties that employees find themselves in. We're also picking up some positive trends, although in the same process where about 62% of people who were surveyed are starting to cut expenses where they can, starting to build a buffer and then handling debt, trying to pay down their debt as far as possible. So we have a program called On the Money Financial Education Program, which is our well-being program, which we offer to employers. And we also do a further research, particularly on employees, as well as the broad communities who attend this program. And what we found through our partnership with our monitoring and evaluation strategic partner, which is DNA Economics, they found that about 13% of people who have gone through this program have reported that there's an increase in their savings. And so they started saving more. And we've also seen about 15% reduction in debt as a result of them attending the program. We also found that a lot of them are feeling more financially secure after attending the program because they understand that there are ways out of the situation that they find themselves in. So the question is, why should you implement a financial well-being program? Okay, quite a number of reasons we can talk to there. Of course, you're going to help employees make informed financial decisions. You're helping your employees to manage their financial life. As we said earlier in that clip, that you cannot separate an employee's financial life, from their work life. One will affect the other. And of course, an unhappy worker cannot deliver, even if you're not necessarily the cause as an employer, but simply by the employee not being able to manage their finances. But it's also a demonstration of care by an employer to the employee that you do care about their well-being. And the program that we offer in order to address some of those challenges that we've highlighted there is made available for free to employers as well as to communities at large as part of our transformation scorecard and commitment to the financial sector charter to transform and to promote financial inclusion. So we have face-to-face engagement. We run these workshops also through online platforms. We've got a very strong presence on social media, and we plant a lot of our content in the media through broadcast, and we also do a lot of engagements through online platforms, and we have an app that will be launching very soon. We've got quite a very strong footprint of facilitators across the country. These are our own employees whose sole purpose is to train employees in the workplace. So, and we also send them to communities. So we have staff that can converse in the local language, and they are able to make relevant examples. This is an example, or rather a list of some of our clients who have been beneficiaries of this particular program, that have gone through the program over the years, and will gladly add you on that list. Another important thing which I want to highlight before I show you the next clip is that because we know that financial concepts of financial education very often is seen as a boring subject. It's not that exciting to a lot of people. So one way in which we try and infuse a bit of excitement and fun in it is that we engage celebrities and artists, and we offer them financial education. We then ask them to talk about what they've learned to an audience through a masterclass. We then take that content and repackage and play it back to your employees. Your employees, in most cases, you find that they are big fans and they're highly influenced by these celebrities. Let me show you a few clips, and we'll start with one that we did at our M Studios.
M Studios brought to you by Old Mutual.
I was just so fixated by the idea of getting rich.
For me, it was do or die.
Fame is not what you see, guys. It's hard work.
I know I used to get paid 500 Rand when I was still starting up, but now, 2 zeros there.
I really messed up.
I've lost a lot of money.
The 30 years, it was just hand to mouth.
Whether you're in the limelight or not, it remains real life. Financial problems are part of real life.
You can't say just because I had a hit this year, I'm going to be here 20 years from now. It's not even about how talented you are, because that's not the thing.
1 minute you're big, 1 minute abasakwazi strategy, so mekhoni ngiyacela.
It's in those cents that make a difference. When I went through my tax issue, personally, I was hit with 2.7 million. I started having to learn what expenses are about.
One of the things that we fall into is we make money as musicians, and then we think, oh, let's buy a car, let's buy a chain. For what?
We've got that mentality of we're poor. When we have that money, we gotta spend it.
I need to look at my pocket. I need to understand where I am as a brand, as a person, as an individual, as a breadwinner.
You have to build that money to trust it on the day that is not as bright as yesterday, that it'll take care of you.
You can't get this money and put it aside for yourself.
If you don't have a plan, you're gonna fall into somebody else's plan who doesn't have a plan for you.
Every DJ, most of the DJ artists basically, in order for them to sustain their careers, it's cool, you're releasing albums or whatever, but what else can you do?
At first, we just thought the music was going to give us the money, and that's it. There's plenty of other things that you can venture out into as a person, not even as an artist. You have to look at your music or your first passion as just like a vehicle.
It's not the time for you to go and buy things that are going to go away quickly. Buy an asset or two.
Yes, cars, it's nice to drive a car, but it's just for a moment. And tomorrow, you're broke. You know, putting your money in property works better.
I always bought tiny little cars, and then I invested my money in a house.
You know, we all start where we don't have money, and we don't want to go back there. For you to be financially independent, you need to keep going in your hustle. You spend on investments.
I'm into commodities, trading.
An asset could be an apartment, could be a studio space, mics and instrument, everything that helps you keep on going.
If you have a brand, invest in it.
Think about the day where you're not going to have a gig, where you're not going to have a hit.
They say, penny wise, pound foolish. Plant a penny and watch it grow.
I think as I conclude, I'll play the last clip, and then that will be the end of my presentation. Again, as I said, I mean, it's about repackaging the content and playing back to employees with people that they relate to and that we know that they're highly influenced by. So I'll play the last clip, and that will be the end of my presentation.
Just one of you is going to be the winner. of this year's theme. You know when they say money talks, some people are talking to money, but money is not talking back. In fact, money is blue ticking you. Think beyond this thing that you're now exposed. You need to be thinking, how do I expand on this? Think creatively about how to diversify your income. Artists who struggle in their career, it's because they don't have alternatives. It's like a one-trick pony. You can't do anything except singing. That's a problem.
What I learned today is that you can not only have something in the music industry as well, but have a different plan as well. And when people tell you, you need a side plan, it's actually making sense to me now.
There's actually like life in the music industry financially, you know, when you open your mind.
You shouldn't spend more than you earn. And that we should treat the singing as business.
You need to be able to take advice. You need to be able to sit yourself down and discipline yourself when it comes to finances as well.
When you have a gig and you get 10,000, just don't spend all of it because there's still tomorrow.
You need to invest in yourself. You need to have a vision if you are an artist. Any investor needs to have a plan. If you don't have a plan, you're going to have a problem.
You need to think of tomorrow and where is your family going to be if you are reckless with your money now. So invest and save, not just one or the other, because saving short term, you need things to pay. Invest long term.
I think you and I need to swap roles now. 10 out of 10. Well done. Give a big round of applause. Make sure you surround yourself with experts. When it comes to your finances, speak to a financial advisor, so you have a proper financial plan in place.
I just think it's very important to know when to spend and where your money needs to go.
Don't be scared to ask for advice from experts and plan for the future.
What I learned today was that I need to respect money, not to use it recklessly.
I don't know whether to give myself credit or give you credit for being brilliant students. Well done. Thank you. Give a big round of applause. Thank you very much. I will now hand over to the studio.
That was John Manyike, the head of financial education at Old Mutual Limited, really unpacking some of these concepts and rather for me, the cost of financial constraints in the workplace from an organizational perspective, but also from the employee perspective. And what I appreciate and something that we're going to delve into in just a few moments with our panel discussion before we bring in our next speaker is looking at the role of not only company culture, but popular culture, because this is something that impacts an entire society, new entrants in the workplace. So it's very important that we don't fill it up too much with the business jargon, but ensure that from a language perspective, from a culture perspective, that we definitely are expanding it. And of course, one other thing that I really want to bring into this panel discussion that we'll be having is, of course, the feelings that are attached to the money conversation. There were mentions of feelings of shame that were brought up into how we are engaging with our money. But this is definitely a conversation that's not only for the executives, but the interns, the junior managers that are being brought into how you could actually engage people and leadership management. I am enjoying your tweets as well. And as we get ready to introduce our next speaker within the theme and this mega trend that we have of financial wellness and financial well-being in the workplace, I'm going to go to two tweets that are standing out for me, particularly as a response to this presentation and address by John. We're coming to Gevaarlik at Gevaarlik21, and he says, mental health at work, yes, this is a real issue, guys, and many people people are getting depression because of this. And our final tweet is coming from Buntle DVD, and she says financial well-being policy is new to her, and she always saw this as an intervention and not part of HR operations. Well, these are the biases that we're engaging in and the new challenges and ideas that we definitely are wanting to bring forth, and the kinds of conversations that we want you to be a part of. Expanding on the theme of financial wellness and the impact of financial constraints in the workplace, we'd like to welcome Dr. Fundile Nyati, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Proactive Health Solutions.
Good morning, everybody. I've been asked to come and share some information about mental health in the workplace and how that is affecting, human resource management. What are the trends currently and what are the future trends? So I'll start with a quote from a US-based, political commentator or an opinion maker, George F. Will, who said, sometimes a future has a way of arriving unannounced and uninvited. This can't be more true than this COVID-19 pandemic. And when you talk to economists, they normally talk of black swan events. And that kind of an event, it's something that is extremely rare, something that's got a severe impact, something that just disrupts everything that you know. And with this COVID-19 pandemic, we surely have an ultimate black swan event. Now, just before I get to talking about the mental health issues, just to say in South Africa, as at 5 p.m. yesterday, we had 2.93 million people who have tested positive, and also 89,584 people who have died from COVID since the 5th of March in 2020. So yesterday we posted just 312 cases, but over the last 7 days, we actually have been seeing an increase in numbers to an extent that there is worry, with the National Institute of Communicable Diseases that we are beginning our fourth wave. So we've gone through the 3 waves. A lot of emotional trauma has taken place over these 3 waves, and now there is an imminent 4th wave. So just to talk about mental health then, when we say somebody, has got, optimal mental health or mental well-being, what are we talking about? Here we're saying that person should be able to fulfill at least 4 things. 1, individual should be able to realize his or her own potential, be able to cope with the normal stresses of life, be able to work productively and fruitfully, and also be able to contribute to his or her community. So when people have got, dysfunction at a mental health level, then you'll find that one or more of these are not realized, and that's where the problem begins, especially in the workplace. Now, in preparing for this, presentation, I came across, one of the quotations in one of the journals I was reading, and that was saying, during any outbreak of infectious diseases, the population's psychological reaction play a critical role in shaping both the spread of the disease and the occurrence of emotional distress and social disorder, either during or after the outbreak. Now, what we have seen with COVID-19 is that there has been a lot of emotional distress and social disorder, and long after the physical illnesses relating to the pandemic have passed, we will still be left with major issues at a psycho-emotional level. And one of the problems, though, is that most governments and organizations tend to not focus a lot on the psychological and the psychiatric impact of the pandemic and focus more on the physical aspects of what the pandemic brings. Now, another professor from King's College in London, Professor Tony Croft, in December last year, he said, Alongside the sometimes severe and fatal physical consequences of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, there is a threat that is far often less discussed, yet it's got major health implications. And the true breadth and depth of this silent epidemic is now becoming clear. He's referring to mental health challenges that are going with COVID-19. All right, my slide there has just stopped. All right, so pre-COVID in South Africa, a lot of studies have been done. One study that was done by the University of Stellenbosch actually found that at least 1 in 4 working people in South Africa suffer from mental illness, especially, depression. That is 1 in 4, or 25%. That was before COVID. Now, the trends that are coming through are actually showing that anything between 40 and even 60% of people who are working are actually suffering from mental distress or actual mental illness. In one of the weekly newspapers in South Africa, News 24 City Press, on the 20th of May, they said there's a mental health tsunami that is brewing in the workforce, and it's not just stress. It is now somebody who has gone beyond being stressed and decompensated to having a mental illness, which can be depression or anxiety disorder or psychosis or any other type of a mental illness. Now, so what is the link between the pandemic that we are dealing with now and mental disability? Well, there is a lot of connection between the two, and that connection comes from 2 levels. The effects of the lockdown or isolation on individuals, the complicated grief that people go through as they experience multiple losses, and these are primary losses, that is loss of a loved one or a friend or a colleague, but also secondary losses, that is loss of how they used to experience life. Depression, anxiety, paranoia, PTSD, obsessive behavior, increased substance dependency, burnout syndrome, hoarding, because people don't want, they are worried about losing jobs, so they end up hoarding work and not wanting to cooperate with other employees in the workplace, generalized psychosocial stress, and worsening of existing mental health problems. That's just one part of how mental health challenges are affecting, employees in the workplace. The other part is, complications from the disease itself, either directly caused by the virus or by the immune system reaction to the virus, causing destruction of the various cells and tissues across the body, with long-term sequelae, which can affect, the brain function, causing things like delirium, dementia, inability to sleep, psychosis, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar mood disorder, relapse of existing mental health issues, and burnout syndrome. So that is how the interplay between the pandemic and the mental health challenges. All right. And so what we're seeing then in workplaces is that employees are having trouble, at a cognitive level with concentrating. They are forgetful, impaired attention, executive dysfunction, low processing speed, disrupted social cognition and language, impaired learning, impaired problem-solving abilities, and impaired verbal fluency. On the psychosocial side, impaired interpersonal functioning, recklessness or carelessness in terms of how they do their work, emotional dependence and need for reassurance, impaired touch with reality, that is on the psychosis side, low energy levels, restlessness, inappropriate workplace-related behavior, symptoms associated with burnout, which are basically mental and physical exhaustion, being removed from one's work and having a cynical view to one's work, and decrease in productivity, that is burnout, disengagement from work, presentism, and extreme mood states and changes. So a study that was done then at the beginning of the pandemic here in South Africa, done by a South African Depression and Anxiety Group, actually found that about 59% of the people that were respondents already had 59%, levels of stress, They presented with stress and were very stressed. And during COVID, it increased to about 65%. And what they found was that 55% of these people had anxiety and panic. 46% had financial stress and pressure, something that talks to the previous presentation by Mr. Manyike. 41%, were removed from family and friends. Other people were actually feeling isolated because they were staying alone. Another study that was done, I think this is in the UK, found that 45% of people had increased anxiety. All right, anxiety is the normal emotional reaction to uncertainty or to what you do not know. So the fear of the unknown, and it may, at a certain point, if one is not able to deal with it, it may cause dysfunction. 48% had depressive disorders, and 22% had increased stress. Right, another study that was done by Erica Hitchens et al. Found that about 60% of the people that were surveyed, 3 in 5, experienced depression, anxiety, or both. And also 8 in 10, that's 80%, experienced symptoms of moderate to severe distress, not necessarily an illness. So that just shows you that not only in South Africa, but also globally, the issue of mental health impact is a big problem. A study done by SADC again before COVID, had looked at issues of depression, burnout, and trauma, domestic violence, and substance abuse in South Africa as the drivers of impaired mental health or illness. But now, in the time of COVID, you then throw in now the issue of technology, or what we call Zoom fatigue, the sedentary lifestyles where there's less time for exercise, physical connection and loneliness, and the disruption of the work-life balance. So you then find that those are now the new drivers of mental health challenges. All right. So now, I already mentioned the issue of Zoom fatigue, but it's not necessarily Zoom. I mean, anybody who's using these platforms, whether it is, Teams or Blue Jeans or any of the platforms, but they just chose to call it a Zoom fatigue. And we now know that people spend longer hours in meetings, meeting after meeting without any break in between. And the amount of energy one needs to be able to follow the discussions during those kind of interactions is actually more than, when you meet people on a face-to-face level. So the issue of Zoom fatigue is a major, major problem across the world. A study done and that was published in the Lancet Psychiatry in April this year found that 33% of people who have survived COVID will, within a 6-month period, present with a neuropsychiatric problem, a neurological problem or psychiatric problem within 6 months of infection. Now that poses problems for employers. There's also another concept called long COVID. And what is that? Long COVID is where somebody survived from COVID. However, 4 weeks after surviving from COVID, they still present with persistent symptoms of COVID or new or long-term complications of that infection. And that is becoming now the bigger problem. And now, as the medical people, we know that COVID-19 is not just a respiratory illness. It is an illness that affects every part of our body. And so we are seeing people who are presenting with persistent symptoms more than a month after they've recovered. And those are, for example, affecting the brain, where somebody's got anxiety, depression, sleep disturbances, PTSD, cognitive disturbances, what we call brain fog, persistent headaches, generalized symptoms like fatigue, decline in the quality of their lives. muscular weakness, joint pain at a respiratory system level, inability to breathe, persistent cough, persistent oxygen requirements, at a heart level, palpitations, chest pains, and also, difficulty in terms of effort tolerance, clotting throughout the body, kidney problems, and hair loss. So the problem of long COVID can affect any system, and more often than not, there's more than one system that is affected, and that presents problems for employers. Study done in Wuhan, which is the first city to have this problem of COVID-19, actually showed that after a year of people having recovered, they are still suffering from some of these, health challenges at a brain level, memory problems, difficulty in sleeping, emotional problems, depression, anxiety, at a respiratory level, difficulty in breathing. And so this is what was seen in a study that was released in August, having been monitored by the professors in Wuhan. So we did our own study here in South Africa, by the National Institute of Communicable Diseases, their Public Health Surveillance and Response Division. They looked at 1,448 patients who were admitted in both public and private sector, and they found that 82% of patients still had persistent symptoms or even new symptoms more than a month after discharge. Irrespective of the severity of the disease, when people got COVID, anyone can actually present with long COVID. And what they've found is that at least 10%, 1 in 10 of people who are infected will have, long COVID. And they even think this 1 in 10 is an underestimation. So what am I trying to say here? I'm saying employers are now faced with a new tsunami that follows the time where people have recovered from COVID. And to deal with it, it needs a multidisciplinary, approach. And what they've also found in the US is that the rehabilitation, or recovery from rehabilitation from COVID-19 is actually even much more difficult than the rehabilitation for people who are recovering from cancer. So, as employers, what needs to happen? Well, having read some of your journals as Topco, I picked up, some of the, the trends that are coming through, that there is a need for, soft skills amongst employees, adaptability, flexibility, resilience, independent problem solving. There is a need to embrace technology, so digital transformation is moving very, very fast. But more importantly, in the area of employee wellness, the lack of separation of work and life as a result of remote working has caused problems. So employers need to look beyond the one day that is put aside as mental health day. Employers need to be much more proactive in assisting their employees to deal with stress so that it does not graduate to become mental illness. Employers need to create the right kind of culture that would enable people to be able to open up when they are suffering, to talk about, their mental health problems. Because what was found by those professors from Stellenbosch is that whilst 25% of the employees have got, mental health problems, only a quarter of that actually come forward and seek help. 75% of them, they do not come forward because of fear of discrimination, fear of stigmatization, fear that they may be overlooked for promotions and projects if they come forward. So employers have an obligation to create a much more conducive environment. Another, article that came from one of the Topco magazines again also showed that health and wellness is now at the center of HR, or people management. And if employers do not invest, in the health and wellness of their employees, they are likely to have challenges going forward with respect to productivity, competitiveness, service delivery, and the bottom line. So what is it that employers should do then? Well, employers need to align their company policies and practices to what is expected in terms of the law, our Constitution, Employment Equity Act, Basic Conditions of Employment Act, and also, the Labor Relations Act. It's important for employers to perform random surveys and data analysis about issues of mental well-being and the impact on employees, create the right environment and workplace culture that makes employees able to open up about their challenges, monitor productivity, measure employee morale, and be able to also, where they see decrease in productivity, zoom in to find out what are the issues. So the company wellness programs need to now be much more robust, and the information from there should actually help organizations to plan better on what they need to do to support their employees who are suffering from mental health challenges. Managers need to be much more switched on issues of mental health. Employees' roles and responsibilities and support needs to be much more clarified. Communication, awareness programs about issues of mental health, especially when it comes to men, because as men, we tend not to, come forward and acknowledge that we are not coping. Yet, when it comes to suicide, we are the gender that actually contributes more towards the suicide rates. So those are just some of the issues in the workplace. Creating a culture of virtual care and reconnection, understanding that we are together even though we are apart. Employers, they need to understand their duty of care, maintain that culture of understanding, empathy, and compassion, ensure that there's regular check-ins with the employees, even if they are working from home, and sometimes create those water cooler moments, intentional check-ins, using the virtual platforms. And managers must know that even though they themselves going through challenges as a result of the pandemic, but as psychological parents to staff, they also need to step forward, provide stability, predictability, engender the dialogue, especially around issues of loss and grief, provide that compassionate support, and be able to know when to refer to the EAP programs. I already talked about the issue of Zoom fatigues and what needs to be done, keeping meetings brief, tuning in from outside, opting for the speaker view, taking notes on paper, avoiding back-to-back calls, and the issue of economics. Most of the people who are working from home don't have the chairs that have got good economic support. So these are just some of the things that needs to be addressed by employers, not only for the people who are in the workplace, but also for those who are working from home. So the issue of isolation and loss of connection is really a big problem. So as one of the business strategists, Peter Drucker, once said, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence itself, it is to act with yesterday's logic. So as we are facing this pandemic, we need to reset, start to think, and be innovative on how we can mitigate this risk, to our employees and to our businesses. So that is my last slide. Thank you very much.
Right now, when it comes to managing your money, it's a jungle out there. That's why you need a strong partner to lead the way. On the Money offers local employers and trade unions access to free virtual financial education workshops for their staff, packed with practical tips to help their employees manage their personal and family finances as smartly as possible. The time is now. Sign up your team today.
Indeed, some chilling statistics and not very bright pictures being painted on the current climate of what is happening when we are talking about financial wellness and well-being in the workplace. To introduce this incredible panel discussion that we are going to have in a very critical and consequential conversations, I am bringing back my panelists to the front, Dr. Fundile Nyati, the Chief Executive Officer of Proactive Health Solutions, and John Manyike, the head of financial education at Old Mutual. Dr. Fundile, and perhaps to swing the pendulum back to you, to the notion, or rather this term of long COVID and the severity of this situation. How do companies really become pandemic proof? And is that something, as we're thinking perhaps a year or 2 years into the future, that we could really look at? Because we're talking about what is becoming really prominent in this discussion is culture, right? And our previous speaker really alluded to the point of how culture really eats strategy. So what are the strategic solutions that we could be looking at? Are we looking at perhaps introducing COVID leaves? Are we looking at, the importance of having these empathetic leaders? Because to your point, you're highlighting, that managers are now becoming staff. So how are we reeling in and saying that, looking at this near future, how do we become pandemic proof? And also at the very same time, highlight the importance of culture into this conversation.
All right, thank you very much. Well, like I said, the last time there was a pandemic of this level was in 1918. So that's about 103 years ago. So this issue is new for everyone. Now, what one needs then in organizations is to first recognize that COVID-19 pandemic, is a major business risk. All right, it's a major business risk. A lot of companies have not been walking the talk when it comes to, health issues. On World AIDS Day, somebody will stand and say, our employees are our best assets, but when you then say, all right, how can we assist you to look after those assets? You find that, there's not even a budget. So employers need to now take health risk, the health risk of their employees, and make it a strategic, area, because we now know without health, everything can come to a standstill. So the organizations must therefore start to take seriously matters of health. Number two, creating that culture that recognizes that we are all going through this and we are all not coping. Our previous coping mechanisms, were able to help us with previous issues, but this is something new. And this is something where we must all play a role to solve it. Number three, creating awareness about this problem. Was like all risk, you identify a risk and then you communicate about the risk, so that people can then be able to be part of managing the risk. So communication of the risk of COVID-19, creating awareness amongst your staff in an ongoing manner with a lot of repetition, that will help people to be knowledgeable. Now we are starting with the problem of vaccine hesitancy. And part of the reason for the vaccine hesitancy that we are seeing in this country is because, at a workplace level, employers have not educated their employees about COVID-19 and about the fact that, the only tool available at this moment to turn things around are vaccines. And so in South Africa, we have just over 41% of adults who have had at least one jab, 35% of adults who are fully vaccinated. And we are not going to meet the 70% at the end of the year. So what should be employers doing? Employers must actually play a positive role in ensuring that they educate their people, gently persuade their people to do the right thing. This is the only tool we have in the toolbox to turn around the things. Number three, understand that they have a legal obligation to provide a safe and healthy work environment for all their employees, vaccinated and unvaccinated. All right? And those who are vaccinated, they also need to be protected against the vaccinated. And those who refuse to be vaccinated, actually, the law does allow for employers, if they have found that COVID-19 is a risk to their workplace, to actually identify it as such and consider implementing vaccine mandates if all the gentle persuasion does not work. So those are just some of the things that need to be done. So bold, courageous leadership that tries to be inclusive, that tries to empower people, but that is also understanding that you can't apply gentle persuasion forever. At some point, decisions have to be made on how to ensure that all employees are actually protected. Because how are you going to deal with an employee who refuses to come to the workplace because the person that they work with is refusing to be vaccinated? Those are just some of the considerations. So courageous, visionary leadership and the culture that is open, a culture that is empowering, a culture that doesn't have discrimination is what we need.
100%. And I think to your point around this bold leadership, it definitely will require us, per Peter Drucker, being poured back into the conversation again, acting with yesterday's knowledge or yesterday's logic rather, or rather the 103-year yesterday from which we face this global pandemic. And as we recognize that health is wealth, John, let me bring you into this discussion and looking particularly at the structures that organization can place, and particularly when we're talking about financial wellness, the effectiveness as well, if you can touch on that, on what has led to the On the Money program and what has driven that effectiveness, and what would be maybe 2 or 3 pointers that you can share for other organizations to consider as they are driving financial well-being.
No, absolutely. I mean, over the years, Old Mutual has always invested in financial education because we recognize the need for financial inclusion. And financial inclusion will be quite difficult to achieve unless you make reasonable steps and be deliberate in your approach to actually educate your workforce around money matters. Because I think, put it simply, employees work because they expect remuneration at the end of the month. So, well, unless you are in a company that takes volunteers who don't get paid. But by virtue of employees working in offering their labor in exchange for remuneration, if they don't know how to manage that money, then it starts creating other challenges, which we've listed in our presentation, around absenteeism, fraud, theft, and so on and so forth. And that is why it's very, very important to actually put a very robust financial well-being programs. So whilst we recognize that there are a lot of employers out there who would actually pay for these services, which is okay if they can afford it, but there are financial institutions like Old Mutual who actually offer some of these financial education interventions, whether face-to-face or through virtual platforms. So we'd certainly encourage employers to look for those kind of partnerships in order to provide a financial well-being program for their employees. Because as we said earlier, that you cannot separate the employees' financial life from their work life. So ultimately one would actually affect the other. So those are things that we generally encourage employers to do. I think in the many years that we've been offering financial education, we've had some brilliant testimonials from a number of employers who have said to us, wow, we actually observed that even our garnish order has taken a sharp decline since the introduction of the On the Money program. Certainly the research that we've done on the program itself indicates that there is a reduction in debt amongst employees who are exposed to financial education. We've also seen an increase in employees saving for their future. So, and these are the very reasons why we believe that for an employer to mitigate those constraints in the workplace, you have to find a financial well-being partner.
And John, I want to stay on the theme of financial well-being and these solutions, because the people that are tuning in, or the innovators that are tuning in, the companies that are tuning in, are not only large organizations or financial institutions that have the capacity, that have the resources to be able to engage with their workers, but we're also dealing with small businesses. We're dealing with startups who perhaps do not have the capacity, do not have the resources to implement such interventions. And we want to congratulate them, I suppose, for taking that first step in going remote and embedding technology in how they are introducing such measures. But what would you say to them, to the smaller guys who also want to be active participant, and we of course know contribute largely to our GDP in South Africa and across the African continent as well? What would you ask them or consider for them to invest in as they are embarking on their journey? And perhaps they don't have the R1 million budget to be able to say, I'm going to come to a financial institution, or I'm going to go to an asset management firm and look after the financial well-being of my small team.
So certainly, and it really boils down to being strategic enough to recognize the need for a financial well-being for the employees, and that's why finding the right partner in that sense, it makes sense. But don't rush to pay. You know, I know they say where there's a voice, there's an invoice, but I can assure you that with us, there's a voice, but there's certainly no invoice, and that's why you need to find such strategic partnerships where you find organizations who share your vision and are happy to partner with yourself where you don't have to pay. You know, of course, there are other services which are more sophisticated, like the counseling, which are things that employers can outsource. But for small businesses, I think you can start with a very simple financial well-being program where a partner like Old Mutual even comes to you instead of you coming to us. We come to you anywhere in the country. We'll come to you whether by road or by air, and there will never be an invoice in your direction to subsidize any of those costs. I mean, this is an investment that we have made to make sure that we remain relevant, but we also cultivate the market in which way we operate by plowing back in the communities, be it in the corporate space or in the broader community. And that's a commitment that we've made. And we recognize the need for even small businesses, you know, especially in the context of the economy, because we know that globally, small businesses are the ones that actually drive economies around the world. And that's why we don't leave small businesses out of the picture. So for me, it is that simple. You just a partner. Interestingly enough, we had an engagement with one big employer, very, very prominent employer with a national footprint. In fact, not only national, global footprint. And they told us, no, we have a service provider. We said, no, we don't have a problem. If you want to keep your service provider, these are services. At the end of our engagement, they said, wow, actually, they saw that they could potentially cut 80% of the cost in terms of their employee well-being program by simply partnering with us, where they know they don't have to actually pay for those services. The ones that are outsourced are the ones that are more sophisticated, the ones that require the services of experts like Dr. Nyati, whom we partner in many respects, by the way, you know, so because we found him very credible, and the kind of work that he does, especially in the area that he's present. You can see he speaks with passion. He's not just a doctor because he spent years behind the desk, but he's really passionate about the stuff he talks about. So these are the kind of partners that we find as Old Mutual. So where we are not able to provide those expertise, we will introduce you to the likes of Dr. Fundinyati, who can assist in other areas, but at least you know the bulk of your cost, which you don't have to pay for, are already carried or subsidized by us.
Absolutely. And it's great to hear the efforts that a big organization like Old Mutual is taking to ensure that the smaller guys are also being taken care of. And I think partnerships and collaboration is definitely a big theme in this discussion of how we can definitely go farther together. Dr. Fundi, I want to shift gears a bit and bring in the employee into this conversation, because I think we've been hearing from management, we've been hearing from the employer in terms of what are the strides that are being taken from organizations like Old Mutual. But what is the employee's role in keeping the employers accountable? Because it could be a tick box exercise. It could be, a policy that has been enforced, but you see that the implementation is not there. And earlier on in your presentation, you mentioned that about 75% of employees do not want to come ahead and say, I'm struggling, right? So what can they do? How can they vocalize that I am struggling, be it financially or be it with my mental well-being? And how can I hold my employer accountable?
Well, I think just understanding that the reason why that 75% of people who have a mental health challenge are not coming forward is because of the culture and the climate within that workplace. So the starting point, like I said earlier, is addressing that. So employers must be deliberate in creating that, but also proper programs, employee health and wellness programs, they need to have some steering committee, multi-stakeholder steering committee within that workplace, whereby they meet regularly and look at various issues that affect their total health, physical, mental, social, and spiritual health. And out of that, then have, a task team that would meet and raise issues, with management, so that those policies that are sitting in the intranet move from being in the intranet and actually get to be implemented. But the biggest challenge also that we find is that line managers, who are the people at the coalface, these are the people who work closely with the staff members. They are the ones who are supposed to identify very early when there's an employee who are not doing well. So again, empowering those line managers to be able to recognize an employee who is struggling either in terms of productivity or work attendance or presenteeism, but no productivity. That is very important. But employees must understand that matters of health and safety, are not nice to have in workplaces. There is a legal obligation for employers to provide for that. And therefore, they need to demand that the employers show them what they are doing. And if they are not doing much, there's even, a way whereby they can even go to the Department of Labor if they're not being listened to by management. So there's a lot of leverage that employees have under the Occupational Health and Safety Act to ensure that employers do the right thing. But they need to be organized. They need to be well represented. They need to engage with the right structures of leadership. And if they're not listened to, then they've got an avenue outside, which is the Department of Labor. So I think that's what is important. Having collaborations between management and employees, a shared understanding of the importance of health and safety matters in the workplace. That's what we need to see.
And on top of the legal obligations that employers have to face, what are the current and perhaps, for lack of a better term, trends that employees and both employers should really brace themselves for when we're talking about mental health in the workplace, when we're talking about this great tsunami in the midst of what even is being termed now the Great Resignation. In the next few months, we're talking about the near future. How can they prepare themselves for what's coming? And most importantly, what is coming?
Well, what is coming is the fact that we've just gone through 3 waves. The actuaries are predicting another wave from the middle of December, peaking around January, early next year. And those waves, they go hand in hand with people being admitted in hospitals. All right? Those things go with people dying. And so what needs to then happen is the employer working with the employees is to see this strain that is coming, this fourth wave, and all the dangers that come with it, and to have honest discussion on how do we save lives. How do we make sure that even if you get infected, you will not end up in hospital? Those discussions around vaccination, very, very, very important. Demystifying the myths that are in social media, about, if you get jabbed, this is what will happen to you. So the void in terms of credible information needs to be addressed by employers. And I had mentioned before, gentle persuasion for people to do the right thing, because there's a study that was released just on the 4th of November by Discovery Health, the biggest medical aid administrator in this country. It shows unequivocally that those members of theirs, over 1.2 million membership, those members of theirs who took the vaccine actually do not get to be hospitalized, or certainly do not die. So that is the tsunami that is coming. The other tsunami is the long COVID, because those people, when they get infected, even if they got mild infection, they may get long COVID, brain fog. Senior manager, executive who was high functioning at an executive level, and this person has got memory problems, this person has got thought, ability problems. This person cannot be able to analyze. So those are the challenges that are coming. And all of those can be mitigated if people actually use the only tool that is there, which is to take vaccination. So for me, that is what needs to be done. It is coming. And most employers are used to just dealing with doctors and stuff. But for employers, there is an obligation to reasonably accommodate employees, with temporary or even permanent impairments or disabilities. And now you need an occupational therapist, speech therapist, to actually work with doctors, and for you as an employer to be able to allow that OT to come in, analyze what kind of work did John Manyika do, and now that he's got brain fog, how can we reasonably accommodate Mr. Manyika so that he can still continue to add value to the organization, despite the fact that his memory, is not optimal. So getting used to working with occupational therapists, to do what we call job evaluation and functional capacity evaluation. It's something that now has to be a norm, whether it's a physical manifestation or a mental manifestation. So that are some of the things that are very, very important for us to consider, as we look at this fourth wave coming, and also the tsunami coming from the previous 3 waves that we've just gone through.
Absolutely. And John, we talk about the fourth wave that's coming. We're talking about the tsunami that's coming. We're talking about all of these ills that are happening, and particularly the great resignation within this context of HR innovation, of human capital management. And what is coming out is also this value add and impact that employers are now going to have to position themselves, and intentionally so, when we are talking about all of these waves and all of this negative impact that'll definitely constrain your employees to do so. So how will people be financially impacted? And is there a way to really pandemic-proof your workplace?
No, absolutely. I think, as we know, that we have a number of employees who are struggling with debt. Some are literally relying on credit to stay afloat, and just for them to be able to turn up for work for those who are still physically going to work. But also, we are at the point where employees can ill afford another pandemic or some form of restriction that could affect their sector. We've seen how the storm of the pandemic has ravaged different sectors of our economy, where certain sectors were completely shut down. And sometimes even when you start introducing these restrictions where it actually disrupts the business, effectively it means there could be further impact on employees' income. And obviously once, if the employee continue to experience these pressures over and above what they're already experiencing with the challenges that they have financially, this could have devastating effects on the employer's bottom line, in the long term. Because obviously if your balance sheet is under enormous pressure because you're just not making enough income because of the restrictions and so on and so forth, there's a risk that more employees could lose their job, but ultimately even the business itself could get to a point where it actually shuts down. And this is why it's important to be proactive around these issues. So we're not saying there's a magic wand that can completely eradicate everything, but with everything that has been said from a medical point of view, but from a financial point of view, it's really about ensuring that there's a well-orchestrated program, very robust intervention that helps and supports employee during these difficult times. And that's the one way you can, to some extent, COVID-proof your employees by offering them with that opportunity. So that's certainly what we will recommend from an Old Mutual perspective.
Absolutely. And as we get ready to wrap up this conversation, something that really stands out for me is all of these buzzwords that have been really prominent throughout this conversation. We're talking about interconnectedness, innovation, robustness. Everything is faster. There's productivity, the resilience, the agility, in order to really become what has become, the startup way of doing things. Because the work hasn't changed, but it's how we work that has changed, and how we'll definitely impact the way we do work, definitely impact human capital management. And as I invite your closing remarks on this particular conversation, if you can, just 3 words or perhaps 3 terms for you that will definitely stand out in the near future as we're talking about financial well-being, as we're talking about mental health, the financial constraints that are in the workplace and that exist in the workplace. Perhaps 3 terms, be it innovation, be it resilience, be it agility, that we need to look forward to, and we need to prepare ourselves as employees, as organizations, large or small, in how we engage with our workforce. Dr. Fundi, I'm going to start with you and then hand over the digital mic to John.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. My closing remarks, the issue of mental health is not new. It did not come with COVID, but what COVID has done is to expose a problem that has not been properly managed in the country. We spend less than 5% of our budgets, as a country on mental health. Certainly, even workplaces, very few workplaces have got robust employee assistance programs for psychosocial counseling. So that's one. I think employers must seriously consider having employee wellness programs in place. Number 2, at an individual level, employees are not coping, and employees need to be helped on how to build their own resilience with all the stress, the uncertainty, the anxiety that this pandemic has brought in. So things like yoga, things like mindfulness are tools that they can have. Stress management, regular exercise, those are tools that are within their control to be able to use to deal with the external stresses that are coming. Focusing on what you can control and leave that is outside of your scope of control. Those things will really help employees to deal better with their mental health challenges. And lastly, for employers, let's walk the talk. Put up those programs, create an enabling, transparent environment that ensures that people get timely support from, and are able to leverage the support that you've already made available. Thank you.
Absolutely. Prioritizing such programs and walking the talk. John, as we've heard, Old Mutual is walking the talk, but what are some of your closing remarks to how we could better construct and better implement such programs?
Yeah, I want to say that the days of prioritizing profits over people are over, unfortunately. So employers need to be human-centered and recognize that you're dealing with employees. These are human beings with financial needs, with physical needs, and all other needs that we know of as social beings. Secondly, that financial well-being is not a luxury. It is definitely a need which no employer can avoid or can survive without having one. And lastly, I think it's important to not only embark or endorse a financial well-being program, but you need to be thorough enough to actually put milestones to say, what are the metrics? What are the things we want to achieve? We want to reduce levels of indebtedness of our employees. And this could be things like the number of garnish orders that you are seeing on your payroll. This could be even absenteeism, trying to actually track whether there's any improvement in terms of attendance at work with this sort of interventions. And then generally looking at the psychosocial element of the employee and the extent to which your financial well-being program is talking to some of these things. If you have a partner that is able to assist you in pulling together the matrix and robustly measure this and celebrate the quick wins as you achieve those milestones, that will be something that will motivate even executives in any organization to remain true to their commitment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. What is clear is that financial well-being is not a luxury. And of course, this human-centeredness brings much more healthy profit as well, so that we can make these data-driven decisions which are going to impact the well-being of our employees and employers in the workplace. A huge thank you to my panelists, Dr. Fundile Nyati, the Chief Executive Officer of Proactive Health Solutions, and John Manyike, the Head of Financial Education at Old Mutual Limited, for this incredibly robust conversation on how we can put in the measures and put in the pandemic-proof design and systems to ensure that there aren't these financial constraints in the workplace. But if there are, these are some of the practical tips and tricks and practices that, of course, you can take to your organization and to your business.